Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Thank you all for being here. I know Bastawy got called in accidentally. If I threw my back to someone, I'm sorry. And I'm sure you all are wondering what is this. But inshallah, my friends in the camera will fix this. Karim hit me before we came in. No, I'm just joking. Anyway, thank you. So let us start by telling you what we're going to discuss today. It's a bit of a debatable topic. I'm pretty sure everyone here is wondering what impact investing is. You've been hearing about impact investing this morning, yesterday, tomorrow, and every day. So today we're here to break the stigma around whether impact investing became something that is mainstream or is it still a niche. And I think there is no one better than my fellow panelists to help me discuss this topic. So please welcome our panelists, and I'll let them all introduce themselves. So why don't you start, Ahmed?
Hello, everyone. I always just say hello and wait for a response. So if there is no response, we cannot proceed, right?
Yeah.
So hello, everyone.
Hi.
So this is Ahmed Bastawy, and I'm the managing director of IceAlex. And we do focus on innovation consulting, but also ventures launchpad. So we support entrepreneurs across different stages in Egypt and Africa. And I'm a board member of AfriLabs as well, which is the biggest African innovation labs network, where we have 470 incubators and accelerators and support structures in 53 countries across Africa, basically. And I'm also a founding board member at the Impact Investing Initiative, where we would share more insights also later. Happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Karim, take it away.
Thank you. So I am senior advisor with Roland Berger. It's the leading European strategy consulting firm. So I focus on sustainability with them. And I'm also an impact investor, an angel investor, part of different networks, including Alex Angels and Med Angels, and really happy to be here.
Awesome.
Hello. My name is Sabrina. I work for a company called Seedstars. Seedstars is a Swiss company that has our HQ is in Geneva. What we do is that our core mission is focused on impact. Our motto is to impact people's lives in emerging markets through entrepreneurship and technology. We do that through two main elements. The first element is capacity building. So we support entrepreneurs by providing them the right capabilities and the right resources to grow. And our second arm is a VC arm, where basically we invest into pre-seed, early-stage startups all over emerging markets that have a focus on impact and tech. That's it.
Awesome. So I think you guys will help me navigate the conversation today. But let's just start by saying, again, I believe you guys hear a lot about impact investing, but I don't think anyone actually knows what impact investing is. Oftentimes it's always exchangeable with ESG. I forgot to introduce myself actually. I'm Nour. I'm an investment associate in Plus VC, which is an early stage venture capital fund. But without further ado, let's get started again. So I think, why don't we kick off the conversation by telling people what impact investing actually is? And I think, Ahmed, you can take it away.
So one of the interesting things that happens when we speak about impact investing, that the first thing that comes to mind is social entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurship, which could be one of the ways of impact investing, but not necessarily. And the way I prefer to define what is impact investing is basically by drawing this picture of having the typical traditional investment that is purely focusing on the commercial aspect on one side, and then that basically we call it finance first. And then on the other side, we have the impact first, where basically philanthropy is represented, and a lot of charity work that happens also backed up by philanthropy. And then whenever we go closer to that side, basically the intersection between the finance and the impact happens is impact investing. So in another way to define it is basically when we do investments in purpose-driven organizations where the impact is in the core of the operations of this business. So the problem-solving mechanism of that venture is basically creating impact while basically generating revenues, instead of just having the impact happening on the side. And it's completely different than ESGs, and we can elaborate more on that, actually.
Karim, would you agree with that? Or do you have
I agree. I can maybe add a bit to what you said. So impact investing is also investments that set very clear social and or environmental targets with clear and measurable outcomes. So if you can't measure your impact, you don't consider that an impact investment. And this is where I think there's a big distinction between ESG and impact.
Yeah. I think we'll get to that in the second section of our conversation. But Sabrina, would you like to add to that?
The last, so that's the trickiest part because they covered most of it. But if I am to add anything to what Ahmed and Karim said, أنا هتكلم شوية عربي وإنجليش عشان أنا لما أجي أعمل استثمار أنا my main goal if it's not impact investing عشان بس draw a line between both I want the business to be profitable صح أنا my goal إن أنا بستثمر عشان عايز أكسب فلوس وعايز عايز الاستثمار ده يجي لي X time 10 times or 20 times whatever if we are to add an impact component into the investment then it's very much about focusing on the outcomes of the investment which means what is the final outcome rather than the process? What's the final outcome that this particular company that I'm investing in is going to reach from a social point of view, environmental point of view, etc. If I am to add on something, it would be the outcome part that is very important.
I think, for sure.
Yeah, and it's very interesting what you're mentioning, and also like normally when we try to break down like what is impact investing, there are three things that we should focus on. في ثلاث حاجات أساسية بنبص عليهم دايما. واحدة منهم is the intentions. So زي ما يعني إنما الأعمال بالنيات. فبasically there should be an intention to do good and to do well. Like basically, and to have a positive impact, because impact could be negative or positive, right? Yeah. So, but here we are focusing on the positive side of it, and it's social or environmental or social / environmental. So intentions is one of them, and then we have also another aspect which is the measurement. So intentions and then measurement. If it's not measured, it's not impact investing. And then the last thing is basically to differentiate it between philanthropies as well is basically the financial returns, and it has to be bringing financial returns. So if these three conditions are coming together, then we can actually come closer to call it an impact investing.
Actually, let me build on that because this is the most confusing thing of impact investing, which is the pursuit of risk and return, financial returns, and social impact. How do you, as IceAlex or Roland or Seedstars, measure, or do you have a framework that measures the balance between both or not? Because oftentimes VCs like myself shy away from impact investing because we don't really understand whether they're actually for-profit startups or are they just doing it for the greater good, let's say. So how do you guys measure that impact? Whether on a financial basis or an impact basis, and how do you balance between both? Sabrina, you can take us away, or Karim.
There are several ways we do it. At Seedstars, there is something which we use in order to kick off any program or any investment we do, which is that we start with something called the theory of change, a TOC. If you're not familiar with that, I'm really asking you and emphasizing on the fact that you need to get familiar with that because this is a framework that allows you to understand impact, to measure impact, and to track impact. So we build our theory of change for every single investment we do, for every single startup that we're going to start accompanying, etc. Based on the theory of change, we understand what are your outcomes, what are your inputs. We understand everything about the model, and then we set very particular KPIs. And these KPIs allows us to understand the data and the impact that is generated by the company. And that allows us afterwards to be able to very much measure and then understand, do you actually fit the criteria or you don't fit it?
Karim?
Yes, so to add, there's a lot of usage of SDGs as a framework, and I personally focus more on environmental impact. So in SDG, I think it's 6 and 13 are renewable energy and climate. More recently, we focus even more on nature-related impact, so SDGs 14, 15. But the issue is these SDGs are used usually in a generic manner, and they're overused So it's very important to go very deep into certain SDG as opposed to saying we cover 10 SDGs as a startup. And I've seen this a lot. The other thing is, from an environmental perspective, we use a framework of the triple planetary crisis, right? So it's climate, pollution, and biodiversity loss. It's not only about climate and renewable energy, but we actually look at circularity to reduce pollution, waste management, and nature-based solutions as well. And for each one of these, we have metrics that are based on, their scientific targets, and also aligning with global COP, for example, COP targets is key for these startups to be.
So what about the profit? Where's the money? دي آخر حاجة بنفكر فيها ده.
No, I think the profit is a given, right? So you cannot invest if there is no case for profits, but both need to be viable. So the impact and the profit. But yes.
Yeah, Ahmed.
It's very interesting what you're mentioning, and also one of the key elements that I always focus on is basically if we have the impact in the core operations of the business. So in the core operations of the business, so this means that the revenues are being generated as a result of solving that problem. So the impact is basically going hand in hand, and it's not basically a trade-off of impact on one side and finance on another side, or profitability on another side. Actually, they are moving on the same way. Because when we saw the other actually phenomenon of having some of the startups, but also some of the investors trying to move towards impact investing by name, not by intentions, النية, and basically how to operationalize that. What happens whenever there is a crisis, an economic crisis, or whatever situation, even internally in the company, the trade-off happens towards basically the profitability and the returns more than the profits. So the theory of change that Sabrina was mentioning is an essential aspect that we focus on, laying over the theory of change and where we would like to go, and how are we going there, and what is the core problem that we are solving, and how are we systematically solving this problem. So this is basically the core operations of our business. And then we use actually the B-Labs impact assessment tool that was created on the SDGs given, because we all know the SDGs, but it's very hard actually to use them to have a continuous way of measurement and management. But basically what's interesting about B-Labs impact assessment was basically that when they did the collaboration with the UNGC, that basically they managed actually to align and have a baseline way of identifying the metrics based on the SDGs as a baseline, and then you keep measuring what are the targets that you would like to hit, and then you evolve while going actually there, so you keep reporting about these things. So basically you have a theory of change, and then you have a metrics that you are measuring, and then you have basically a quantifiable metric that you have reached, and you are capable of reporting about that. And another aspect that I would close there with was basically the IRIS Plus, where basically they have a very, very tailored metrics that are customized to specific industries and sectors by the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. And it's very beautiful, and it could be taken away even without having the theory of change done. But of course, this will not be a systematic approach. But then you can actually have the metrics and then keep reporting on them.
We're totally not trying to make it harder on anyone. There were 4 or 5 metrics or frameworks mentioned, but it's just a nice way to actually show a lot of startups that are in the room that it's not just labeling yourself as an sustainable startup or an impact-driven startup. There are ways to measure it, and we'd love to have the conversations forward after the panel. But let's take it back a notch and maybe ease the mood. Karim, I think you can help us the most in that. What happened? Why is impact investing on the radar right now? It was always there. There was always the topic of biodiversity and nature and sustainability. But what has driven it to be on the radar so much now?
Well, I mentioned earlier the triple planetary crisis. I think we're all waking up to the crisis. So it's not only about climate, it's also about the risk of ecological collapse, which means the collapse of supply chains. It means the collapse of agriculture, and so this is a threat to our own survival. And I think investors are noticing this globally and are starting to, well, a lot of the investors are noticing. A lot of the public listed companies, the global 500, etc., are still not able to adapt. But I think this is driving change. But most of the hope comes from startups, comes from the smaller, younger businesses and entrepreneurs, as opposed to the larger organizations. And so we see changes in regulations. We also see changes, for example, in ESG requirements. They're a lot more stringent now when, for example, if you're listed on the stock market in Egypt, now you have to report on your sustainability performance, which wasn't there 2 years ago.
And Ahmed, I think maybe because you see a lot of startups, which Karim has mentioned, are you seeing more startups becoming impact-driven or labeling themselves as impact-driven, which is becoming more mainstream just because of the buzz around the word right now, or are they actually trying to make a change in the ecosystem?
So allow me to respond in Arabic because also we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. فواحدة من الحاجات اللي كنا بنشوفها قبل كده كان ان لما يبقى في حد بيعمل سوشيال انتربرايز او شركه مجتمعيه او ستارت اب مجتمعيه، فكان واحده من الحاجات اللي بيركز عليها ان هو ما بيقولش ان هو سوشيال انتربرايز عشان الانفسترز they are shying away، بيحاولوا بيبعدوا عنه عشان هم عارفين ان هو في الاخر بيعمل حاجه حلوه وبس مش بتجيب فلوس. بيعمل حاجه ممكن يبقى ليها مردود اجتماعي او بيئي بس في الاخر هي ما فيش ريتيرنز جايه منه، فغالبا they shy away. they started labeling themselves as entrepreneurs عادي خالص ويروحوا يشقوا طريقهم زي باقي الانتربرنورز. وبعد كده اللي حصل ان هم بقى في جرانتس اكتر رايحه للسوشيال انتربرنورز، فبقى بيرجعوا تاني يقولوا ان احنا سوشيال انتربرنورز. ولقينا كمان ان في فينومينون جايه من الانتربرنورز العاديين اللي هو البيزنس بتاعه بيزنس از يوجوال او ممكن يبقى بيورلي كوميرشال، بقى بيحاول يقول طب احنا بنعمل جوبز كتير جدا فاحنا actually we are a social enterprise. بس actually this is not true يعني لان هو مش اي حد بيعمل وظائف معناه ان هو social enterprise. احنا كنا بندردش شويه في الموضوع ده. ولقينا كمان الانفسترز بقوا بيحاولوا يروحوا شويه واحد
لا قرب المايك.
اوكي. فلقينا كمان الانفسترز بيحاولوا يروحوا شويه ناحيه الامباكت انفستنج لما بقى في فوكس اكتر جلوبالي اون ذا امباكت انفستنج، يعني بقى في محافظ مركزه بشكل اساسي على الامباكت انفستنج وحتى اون هافينج ذا تيبيكال انفستمنت فروم ان امباكت برسبكتيف، لان هم كمان كانوا خايفين يقولوا امباكت فالانفسترز يطلعوا يجروا. This is true.
ما بنطلعش قوي يعني.
لا this is true. This is happening. These days what's interesting that it's becoming a trend. فده الشيء الجميل، فاحنا نقدر نتحرك عليها بشكل اسرع. الشيء اللي مش جميل ان هو في بعض الناس بتحط الليبلز، فدي claim to be impact investors او they claim to be impact investees، يعني سواء شركات او investors، وبس هو actually it's not genuine. بس انا يعني I claim ان هو حتى لو احنا we claimed فيمكن نتعدي ونعملها بشكل حقيقي فالمومنتم يتخلق ويتحرك. بس at the same time انا بحكي بس الصوره بشكل عام، في ناس شغاله بشكل dedicated they are trying actually to do very good work on the ground from the company side and the startup side بس كمان from the investor side and they are doing it genuinely كمان.
Yeah. And from the investor side, by the people that are doing it genuinely. Sabrina, I think Seedstars is one of the most impact-driven, let's say, investors, entities that are really focusing on making a difference in impact, even when it comes to the funds investors themselves. So what are you seeing right now, and basically how are you facilitating a connection between external investors like مثلا myself to become more aware of investing in impact-driven startups and easing the الحتة بيقولها ان احنا بنطلع نجري اول ما اشوف ان ده impact driven. How are you easing that as Seedstars?
I think in what's a bit different with Seedstars ان احنا ال starting point بتاعنا هو ال impact, which means ان احنا الشركة بقى لها 10 سنين موجودة. What first of all the trend that we can see is that obviously the pool بتاع ال startup that we get to work with got way bigger. من 10 سنين again زي ما أحمد كان بيقول اللي هو حتى لو أنت بتعمل impact مش هتقول قوي إن أنت بتعمل impact because هتخاف إن الانفستور يقول لا ما الامباكت ده مش بياكل عيش فاحنا مش هنinvest. يعني I want to make sure that you have a very strong business model و I want to make sure ان انت you're profitable before actually having a positive social, environmental, whatever impact. I think the role that Seedstars got to play ان احنا نساعد ان احنا نغير الناراتيف دي شويه، ان احنا we were able من الاول from the very start to showcase that both can come hand in hand from the very start. How were we able to do that? In the VC arm of Seedstars, our LPs, the limited partners that invest in our fund عشان احنا بعدين dispatch الفلوس, are impact oriented. What does that mean? One of our main LP is the IFC. IFC is part of the World Bank Group, etc. وهم the biggest priority is impact. فهم أصلاً لما بيجوا يقولوا لنا احنا هنحط 10 مليون ولا 20 مليون ولا 30 مليون في الفند بتاعكم, our condition is إن انتوا to invest into impact startups. It's completely changing the narrative, because now impact is actually for some of the very important LPs at the core of their requirements. That's why بقول شوية for Seedstars it's a bit different عشان احنا starting point هو impact, and based on that بقى اللي بنعمله ان احنا we're able ان احنا connect. We're able to kind of write another narrative, and this other narrative afterwards bit open doors لل other VCs اللي هو actually that makes sense, that comes hand in hand, etc. We're kind of writing a new story when it comes to the two elements hand in hand.
No, I love that. And honestly, I agree completely, because entities like yours are really easing the conversation between external investors or other VCs that don't understand what impact investing is, and to get into it easily. But Ahmed, you wanted to add a point?
Just throw a question to both of you, if you don't mind. So one of the hardest things actually to investors and most expensive aspects of impact investing is basically the IMM, the impact measurement and management, قياس الأثر وإدارته. And that's why actually they also, whenever they have the intentions to be impact investors, they do not have the tools or the methods to do that systematically, because also it's a very draining process. So how are you doing that in your cases as well?
In our case, impact measurement is plugged in to our due diligence, for instance. So again, عشان كده احنا it's like methodologies that we created from scratch to plug them into our DD, into how do we look, how do we assess startups, how do we find them. It's something that we start from scratch that allows us to like have that in mind from the very start. It's plugged in from the very start.
Maybe just to add to this, we look for startups that really solve a very practical problem when it comes to, for example, the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis. So if the core or the foundation of the startup is built on finding a solution for the crisis, then it's a given, right?
Given.
And that's how we identify the most promising ones.
Karim, actually, I wanted to direct a question directly to you, because انت يمكن بتشوف things beyond startups شوية. You actually set the strategy for bigger corporations to go ahead and focus on sustainability. What are you seeing right now? What's the biggest driver? What are you focusing on at Roland at the moment? And what's the overall holistic vision that you guys are strategizing with your clients, obviously?
Yeah, sure. So in the Middle East, we are a group of maybe 80 people, consultants, just focused on sustainability. And we work with the largest clients in this area in the Middle East, including government bodies, ministries, but also wealth funds mainly, and companies established by these wealth funds. And I can tell you for a fact that a lot of these wealth funds and these, I would say, public companies are investing very large sums to develop their M&A strategies focused on sustainability. So we advise them on the market entry strategies, and this creates a very large market for startups eventually.
That's gorgeous. And is there any particular emerging trends that you're seeing right now when it comes to, let's say, specific strategies that your clients are asking for? Let's say something in biodiversity, or something that is very specific that is up and coming right now globally?
Yeah, globally and regionally. So, for example, when it comes to circularity, there's a very large market that's untapped in the region. So we have very large clients that are investing literally billions in creating the waste management infrastructure in, let's say, the GCC mainly, but around the region. And this is creating demand for smaller companies, and that they acquire to expand quickly. In conservation, biodiversity, we're seeing for investments, for instance, in nature restoration technologies, right? Satellite imagery, for instance, but also solutions like ecotourism. I mean, ecotourism is I would say, a very growing market in Egypt. It's not a very tech-oriented necessarily sector, but it's provides solutions for the biodiversity crisis, and we're seeing a lot of investments in ecotourism.
We're giving you ideas of how to start your startup in impact investing. I'm just giving away clues. But I think what we would like to focus on in our last section maybe is how can we preserve all of what you guys are saying? I think we spoke a lot about البالانس ما بين the profit أو الفلوس and the impact. We spoke a lot about what it is, why is it on the trend right now, why is it becoming so mainstream. How can we maintain the integrity of impact investing? How can it keep its essence? Sabrina, I think if you want to.
The integrity of impact investing, that's such I think I'm seeing it from another perspective. I think that having impact investing as the new norm is actually very positive.
I think that Ahmed كان لسه بيقوله بالظبط.
I think that we should actually head towards that. بالنسبة لي, the biggest problem is how impact investing right now is extremely scattered. يعني احنا انت سألتينا سؤال ازاي بتmeasure your how do you define or how do you assess? We all came up with like a million frameworks, and I think that it's not necessarily a problem. It's just that I think the effort should be structured in order to be powerful, because whenever things are extremely scattered, then you lose a bit the track and you don't really understand the point of impact investing. أنا إحنا قلنا impact 500,000 مرة.
If I had a penny, literally.
But the point of impact investing is to actually be powerful. So in order to reach your target, or in order to hit whatever you want to reach, you need to make sure that there is a kind of consensus around whatever you're trying to do. فأنا بالنسبة لي, it's very good that it's actually getting more and more popular. Hopefully it's going to be the new norm. Hopefully investing without having an impact objective won't happen anymore. However, let's make it less scattered by creating a kind of momentum around how do we measure it, the methodologies and everything.
That's fantastic. Ahmed, I think already you gave us a clue about نفس اللي صابرينا بتقوله إن it's actually a good thing, but again, how can it preserve not anyone that wants to come into the market and say, oh wallahi, I'm hiring 60% female, which is part of his impact. How can it be differentiated, and this is just not a buzzword, it's just not another panel topic?
No, it's not. The panel is interesting though.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's one of the things that actually we have worked on. I'll just share one example that we have took some actions towards, was basically the impact investing initiative. So we co-founded that actually 1.5 years ago. And then we had that aspiration of creating and nurturing an impact investing ecosystem for genuine players, both from the investors and investees side, but also from the enablers and also the government side. So that was the intentions back then. And then with the evolution of time, then few months ago, we have kicked off in collaboration with UI Investment, something called Angel's Garden. And the Angel's Garden was focusing primarily on the end in mind. We wanted to deploy transactions into the impact investing ecosystem, because we believed that was our assumption. If we manage to do that, this is the ultimate goal. So let's start from there. So we basically created a journey with impact investors, and investors who would like to be impact investors. So we had 13 investors willing to deploy and committed, and we had like 30 observers of investors who are willing to see what's happening, and then they might step in and become part of the game. And we didn't open a call for application, but it was basically headhunting, direct referrals, and nominations. So we had 30 companies at the portfolio, and then we picked 1/3 of them. We worked together closely over the span of 3 months, and then we picked 4 of them. And then on the demo day, we closed nearly $300K as investments for the 4 companies, instead of just like, started the conversation back then. So that was basically one way of walking the talk at the same time, and basically making sure that the investors who are trying to become impact driven are finding good opportunities that are investable, but also they are creating impact as part of the core operations. And we are doing like touch points between them both. So the investors were mentoring the startups to become where they would like to see and what they would like to see in few months. And in 11th of September last month, we closed actually that type. And then at these days, we are in the deployment phase.
I love that actually, because you had them all together in the journey. You made it all doable, yani, basically.
Right. It was customized towards the needs of both of them.
Yeah.
And it was, alhamdulillah, and it was very successful and to the point. And basically, instead of, we fleshed out actually all the, the buzzwords and, the jargon in the conversation and in the terminologies. And we created very, hands-on models that could be taken further.
That's super cool. Karim, actually, I can switch up the question shwaya. How can we basically increase investor appetite at the moment with what's happening globally, everywhere in the world? It's a crazy world at the moment. فأكيد investors right now, especially bigger investments, even though they have a mandate for impact, but still what would actually subside is the normal, traditional ways of investing. So how can we increase investor appetite amidst such a crazy world to redirect it towards it's all the same. It's basically impact investing is part of normal investing.
Yeah, maybe two things. I would say the first is blended finance. You mentioned IFC. So there are global organizations and global funds that are not necessarily private. They're government sponsored or like the IFC, for instance. And these play a very large role in reducing the risk for private investors in getting into these, I would say, in many cases, very high-risk ventures. So that is number one. The second one is regulations. You need to make sure that there are regulations that, for example, would require companies to report on their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. If that's the case and you have strong regulations, then there's going to be a market naturally. So I would say government support and blended finance are key.
That's amazing. Any final thoughts from our panelists?
On what in particular?
They just shouted at me for time. طيب, I don't know if we have time for Q&A, but maybe we can open the floor for a couple of questions.
طيب مساء الخير. انا مبسوط قوي بصراحه بالبانل دي لان هي انتو ذا بوينت قوي الحاجه اللي احنا بنشتغل عليها. انا اسمي حازم، انا ليد انجينير في شركه اسمها ريموت كودرز. احنا سويس اورجانيزيشن working in Egypt. we totally impact. احنا بنحاول نلاقي فرص للشباب vulnerable اللي في مصر، اللي هم البنات مثلا اللي بتحاول تبدا في الفيلد ومش عارفه، الشباب اللي بتحاول تعمل سويتش كارير، الكلام ده كله، وبنديهم شويه اديوكيشن وبنلاقي لهم شغل في سويسرا. مينلي سويسرا عندنا شركه في قبرص، احنا عندنا بورتفوليو حوالي 15 شركه. الفكره ان احنا دلوقتي توتالي فاندد باي الحكومه السويسريه وبالشركات طبعا اللي معانا. السؤال بقى بتاعي ازاي ريتش اوت او الاقي الكوميونتي اللي يساعدني الحاجه زي دي في مصر. يعني برضو انتوا لسه كنتوا لسه بتشرحوا ان الامباكت لسه جروينج، بس احنا بندور ومش بنلاقي اوبورتيونيتي قوي ان حد يساعدنا او ينفست معانا في اللي احنا بنحاول نعمله. خصوصا ان احنا مش ستارت اب، احنا احنا ستيل ستارت اب بقالنا سنتين تقريبا، بس احنا اون جراوند. احنا عندنا شباب، احنا في الكوهورت السادس، احنا عندنا شباب اوريدي هايرد باي الشركات بتاعتهم في سويسرا. عايزين نكسباند في الماركت المصري، عايزين نلاقي شغل في الماركت المصري ان احنا نتسع مع شركات يعني. والحاجه الثانيه محتاجين نلاقي انفستورز من الماركت هنا. فسؤالي ازاي اقدر الاقي ده، او فين الكوميونتي اللي الاقي فيها الانفستمنت ده؟
Let's have a chat after the panel. Yeah, but actually, so one of the interesting things that speaking about the Swiss government, one of the projects that was happening 2 years ago, the closure of the project, we had it as impact investing focused, and that was actually one of the seeds where we kicked off some of the communities that is working. But yani happy to chat further and see how could we mobilize the network of investors, but also the companies that basically started the journey with us, and see synergies growing up.
Yeah, I think you need to tap into the network of universities and schools, and so the youth, And I think that awareness is key. We need more awareness with the youth about let's say the environmental crisis, and this will naturally create more ideas, more startups and projects. So there's actually an organization that I support called Greenish Foundation. They create environmental clubs in universities and schools. They do a great job, and these types of foundations need support to increase awareness.
Do we have any other questions? I think that would be it from our side. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope that impact investing does not lose its essence. But that's why we're here, and we're here to help you with any questions you have after the panel. Thank you.